Welcome to another video discussion about China and Iran. I'm really happy today to have my friend Sara Bazoobandi. Sara is a research fellow at the German Institute for Global and Area Studies in Hamburg, or GIGA. Sara is somebody whose writing and conversations about Iran have really helped me a lot over the years in understanding better what the relationship with China would look like. And she recently wrote an article for Middle East Policy, which is really good. I'll include a link to the article below on this page. It's called Iran Strategies in Response to Changes in U.S.-China Relations. Sara, welcome. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you very much for having me, and thanks for the kind introduction.
Oh, of course. So I think one thing that's really useful in this article, you start by saying that, there are three main strategies for Tehran, and I'll list them here. The first is to deepen its ties with China, to revise its policies in the Gulf region, and to project power through showing off its military capabilities in Ukraine. And I'm wondering, how does the first, deepening its ties with China, support its others? How do you think leaders in Iran see working with China as supporting their bigger strategic agenda?
I think the bottom line for Iran and the strategic planners in the country is that there is this understanding of a changing global order, and they are extremely convinced that this change is coming. There is an ideological element to it. In the Shia theology, there is strong belief on the return of the 12th Shia Imam, Mahdi. There is a stream of scholars and policymakers and military staff and IRGC members who are very much compliant to this ideology that Mahdi is coming. In order for him to come, it's the Shia community's responsibility to pave the ground. And paving the ground means that we have to fight against whoever is potentially going to oppose the return of Mahdi. In their views, the West, led by the United States and the Western world and the Western civilization, is the biggest opponent of Mahdi. So whoever objects to the West is automatically working alongside the Iranian strategic thinkers and strategic planners to achieve their ultimate goal. So ideologically, this is far away from what's the one-party system in China believes in. But strategically and practically, they are convinced that China is perhaps one of the only powers, global powers, that can confront the United States, can help the decline and facilitate and accelerate the decline of the US and the decline of this Western civilization. And that, in a sense, very much is in line with their broader world vision that a lot of strategic thinkers and planners inside Iran have. Economically, of course, it's important for them to strengthen tie with China because, sanctions, isolation, nobody else wants to do business with Iran. China has a lot of capacity, although Iran has frequently complained that they're not getting enough from their relationship with China, perhaps correctly so, in terms of investment, in terms of trade, consumer goods, all sorts of possible avenues of economic collaboration has been explored by the Iranian governments and not really fully achieved the full potential and full desire that they had for these potentials and for these avenues of doing business and economic, expanding their economic ties with China. And for them, for the Iranian government, there is also a prestige element in all of their foreign policy. In a sense that the projection of power through narrative, through discourse, through media, image, through social media manipulation, through influence operation, cyber-enabled influence operation is really gaining a lot of interest in Iran, and it's becoming really important, visible that it's an important element of their foreign policy and foreign strategy. Siding with China gives them that PR moments. For example, the naval drills that they have been conducting alongside with China and Russia very frequently since 2018. Several episodes of these naval drills have happened. And that, in a sense, gives the Iranian government this opportunity to project themselves as a member of the sort of leading league of the global competition, the axis, a member of the axis that is pushing against the US influence globally.
There's a lot of really interesting stuff in that. But I'm thinking I remember talking to you in Hamburg a couple of years ago, and you said something that struck me when you were talking about the economy. I've always maintained that China is primarily an economic actor in the region. And when you look at the numbers, China does comparatively little with Iran, especially measured against the UAE and against Saudi. And my thinking was that was mostly a reflection of just limitations on the Iranian economy because of sanctions. And I remember you saying something to the effect of that Iran is a really hard economy to operate in for anybody, let alone a foreign company or foreign nationals trying to work in it. Do you think that logic holds that it's just not just because of sanctions, but that it's kind of just an undesirable market for China to try to engage with?
Yes, I think the Chinese know Iranian market very well. They have been cooperating in Iran for decades. They have been involved in various sectors, in construction sector, which is sort of my background. In my previous life, I worked as a civil engineer for a construction company, state-owned, semi-state-owned construction company in Iran, and we had close collaborations with Chinese entities. And they know Iranian economy through and through. They know the level of corruption. They know how to bypass limitations. They know who is in charge. They know what are the areas of potential growth. And I don't think they, at least at this stage, they see any incentive, or they're not motivated to expand beyond what exists at the moment. Iranian economy has a very large consumer market. Chinese low quality, relatively cheaper consumer goods have taken over Iranian economy, from clothing manufacturing sector all the way to automotive sector, all the way to kitchen appliances, you name it. Any form of consumer good that can be sold is being sold by the Chinese in the Iranian economy, and the Iranian consumers are sort of complaining about the low quality, complaining about the fact that they have no other option, but nevertheless they are really keen on consuming all these goods that are being produced by the Chinese producers. In terms of investment and engaging in, for example, infrastructure projects that China has been negotiating and debating for a very long time, China has had a strategy to keep the foot at the door, but not really entering the market. They want to, I mean, at least my understanding of their strategy has been that they want to be the first to enter as and when they desire, but they don't really want to fully enter in terms of engaging in investment, large scale investment projects. Otherwise, they've had all the opportunities, even pre-sanctions. They had the opportunities to pre-2011, at least. Iran has been under sanctions for more than 4 decades, but 2011 sanctions, nuclear related sanctions that really tightened the screw on Iranian economy, they have had opportunity to enter in various projects, but they really have always been cautious and hesitant. And another reason, other than the difficulty of doing business and operating in Iranian economy and Iranian system, which is very much dominated by the military business complex, the IRGC network of construction companies, banking system, military arms. Everything is basically one way or another connected to that network of influence of the security apparatus inside Iran. Apart from that, I think they sort of do cost benefit analysis, and they think, well, they would have a lot easier business and a lot more profitable and less headache in terms of sanctions and so on in neighboring countries, in Saudi Arabia, in the UAE. Why bother? And I think that why bother question is really an important question that defines China's strategy in engaging with Iran. But Iranians have been really keen on expanding these ties with China. I have seen it, I've witnessed it firsthand from inside Iran, especially in the construction sector, how keen Iranian companies have been to collaborate with China.
Yeah, within that, I'm thinking a few years ago, I was talking with a Chinese businessman who was here in the UAE, but he had been in Iran for a while. And he said he would be walking in the market or he'd be out shopping, and Iranian people would kind of hector him and say, like, I just bought a Chinese TV 6 months ago and it's already broken, and our washing machine doesn't work. And he felt like he was the focus of a lot of cheap stuff. And he said he finally snapped and said, well, look, if you want to see our good products, go to Dubai, because that's where we ship the good stuff and we ship the bad stuff here. Which probably didn't help his situation very much, because I'm sure that just drew a lot more negative energy. But I also remember talking to an Iranian friend who said one of the biggest sticking points was that Chinese garlic is kind of flooding the market, and they're like, it doesn't taste good. We want Iranian garlic. It ruins our food. So, I mean, it's really funny just on kind of this micro level, the things that were frustrating people about China's dominance in the economy. I know that EVs, especially, or the Chinese automakers, have completely flooded the Iranian market. um, yeah, it's very interesting. I think a big part of it is, for decades now, Chinese engineers, Chinese companies, Chinese products have been really the only options. So even if Iranian companies were to look in another direction, you'd have to train people on all new systems, all new everything, right?
Yes, that's absolutely true. To add to your anecdotal evidence from your conversations with the Chinese business community, I would like to add this little story as well. That absolutely correctly you put it, that there is this general sense of public resentment against the Chinese inside Iran, against their foreign policy, because they feel, the general sort of the ever expanding unsympathetic elements of the society. I would like to refer to them, because I don't speak to every single Iranian, the more than 85 million, right? But the ever expanding unsympathetic segments, they have this sense of resentment against China as a whole. They don't approve their foreign policy, because they believe that they are supporting the Iranian government in achieving their global agenda. They don't approve of their collaboration between Chinese government and Iranian government, for example, in terms of exchange of technology, internet filtering, citizen surveillance, putting CCTVs across the cities to observe and catch women who don't wear hijab, for example, in public spaces. There's been several reports that Chinese companies have provided the Iranians with this technology to be able to really tighten the public space against women and against, that ever expanding unsympathetic segment of the society. There has been also, I've witnessed it myself, especially across the social media, where various reports by ordinary Iranians who share video footages of the Chinese. Maybe they are tourists, maybe they are working in Iran. We don't really know their affiliations, but the Chinese women across various public spaces in Iran, in historical sites, in restaurants, in shopping malls, not observing the local hijab code. And nobody really from the, so-called morality police really approaches them. Nobody harasses them. Nobody tells them what to do. And they're sort of accepted to behave in whatever way they please inside a country, which at the same time is really oppressing women and harassing women for doing exactly the same thing. So the rule that apply to Iranian women don't apply to Chinese women inside Iran, and that has also really been a center of at the center of attention by the Iranian public, and they who find themselves caught by this hypocrisy of Iranian government, if you will, welcoming the Chinese and giving them all sorts of exceptions and accepting all sorts of behavior by the Chinese visitors and Chinese citizens who live in Iran, but at the same time not giving the same right to the Iranian women.
That's really useful context. I think a lot of people watching this are probably going to find that really fascinating. But I'd like to go back to the geopolitical side, because when you were talking about kind of the ideological thinking in Tehran that, working with China kind of supports this broader agenda of replacing, this hegemonic US-led or Western-led order. I think that's also interesting because I've been looking at what China's support for Iran has always seemed pretty superficial to me. And looking at what's happened in the Middle East over the past year, I guess year and a week, especially, I was wondering how Iranians see Chinese support and helping them with this kind of very, very tenuous regional order that puts Iran in my thinking, in a pretty fragile position. Um, do you think that there's this idea that China really does support Iran in this regional crisis, that working with China is helping Iran in any meaningful way?
I think the view of the public, the at least the unsympathetic elements of the society towards the establishment is clear. We already covered that. But if you look at the elite, the political, powerful, sort of very small, I would say, elite inside Iran, at the top and senior level, i.e., the office of the supreme leader, and perhaps the Majlis, the parliament, and so on and so forth, there is an increasing level of trust towards the Chinese government. And the reason for that is, I think, purely China's effort in supporting Iran's sanctions circumvention efforts. Of course, that has expanded to other realms like technological exchanges and collaborations, especially post 2022. Political uprising in Iran that has really become evident. But at the senior level, if you look at, for example, the speeches by the Supreme Leader, you would see that he has frequently thanked the Chinese friends for their support and for their constant commitment to assist the Islamic Revolutionary Government. So I think whether this comes from a genuine sense of trust or not, who am I to say anything? But at least the narrative and through the publicly available data, we could say that there is a lot of emphasis on this trust on the Chinese government. But also, sometimes there are some episodes that it really backlashes on the government, and the elite finds themselves really helpless in the sense that they can't find ways to defend their relationship with China. The best example was when Premier Xi attended the GCC summits, that at the end of which the statement that is issued by the GCC always has a clause, a statement, a sentence that they condemn Iran's illegal sort of control over the three islands in the Persian Gulf. That created a lot of public debate. Even the local print and local broadcast media covered it. The Iranian, across social media, kept demanding the government to, foreign ministry needs to call in and summon the Chinese ambassador and tell them that we are unhappy about this. So there are some episodes that every now and again, it sort of shows that it becomes very evident and very, very public that this trust may not really come from the bottom of their hearts, but I would say that at the moment, that's what most convenient for both sides to maintain this narrative and this image.
Yeah, I mean, when you're describing it, I immediately started to think about the Three Islands statement at the end of that December 22 summit. Because you're right, they did call the ambassador in to voice their displeasure. I remember reading that Members of the Majlis were having fierce debates about, can we trust China? One member I remember said something like, at this rate, China's going to be a bigger threat to us than the US, and a lot of hyperbole. But I also wonder, just, of course, I think Iranian leaders would be consistent in that message because they don't really have a lot of other great power partners, and the asymmetry in that relationship, I think, puts them in a position where they have to keep voicing this, thank you, China, for work, for your support, and we'll continue to work with you. But I imagine in the back of their mind, they keep thinking, like any weaker partner in an asymmetrical relationship, you're worried about this fear of abandonment. And this takes me back to your essay in Middle East policy, where you talk about the role of the US, because I think the last time Xi Jinping was in Tehran was in January 16. And this was right after the JCPOA was signed. There was all this talk about there's going to be a massive trade relationship and investment, and we're going to do all these wonderful things together. But then Donald Trump was elected president, and he said a lot of, he directed his foreign policy was pretty limited to two things were the big ones: Iran and pulling out the JCPOA and encountering China. And I think the leaders in Beijing looked at this and said, sorry, Iran, you're not worth, the $12 billion a year in trade we do with you is not worth sacrificing the 600 billion a year we're doing with the US. And China really quickly dropped Iran. And that's a pattern I've seen a lot over, say the past 10 or 15 years, where China will do a lot with Iran when it's useful to them. But when it becomes problematic, especially vis-a-vis the US, China abandons them. And I'm sure Iranian leaders are as cognizant of this as anybody. Do you think that's in the back of their mind, that they're seeing, they have to be supportive of China rhetorically, but maybe worrying in the back of their minds that this may not last?
Yes, the why bother question that I mentioned earlier in the Chinese calculus is really an important factor for their decision making and their strategies towards Iran and any other country in the Middle East, for that matter. Because, the Middle East is considered a peripheral region for China. Their immediate concern is South China Sea, is Taiwan, is the neighboring countries and the littoral states around there. They have, serious issues in that part of the world. But the Middle East is, yes, of course, it's important because of energy security and energy trade, but still the geopolitics of the region, so long as the energy can safely travel through the Strait of Hormuz, it's not really that, much of a concern for the Chinese government. And of course, I mentioned it in the paper, and you rightly also pointed it out, that Chinese have had the one step forward, two step backward sort of relations with Tehran. They have signed up to every single resolution against Iran, every single sanction against Iran in their years prior to the conclusion of the JCPOA. And then when Trump came and pulled the plug, they sort of helped Iran to bypass the same sanctions that they also approved of themselves. That really tells you a lot about the way that the Chinese operate, and their strategies towards their relationship and about their relationship with Iran. Of course, again, there's what is at the bottom of the heart of Iranian strategic thinkers is beyond my judgment. But I would imagine that they feel threatened and they feel insecure. And if you look at the sort of literature that has been produced over the years by the strategic studies centers, government-sponsored think tanks, and so on and so forth, there is one phrase that in every single report comes up, and that's the strategic loneliness of the Islamic Republic of Iran. So that tells you that there is this strategic loneliness is a part of the political psyche of the Iranian government. And the Chinese are not really helping Iran to overcome its strategic loneliness with their sort of, complicated approach towards Iran. But putting myself in the shoes of the policymakers in Iran and the senior decision makers in Iran, they don't really have any other option. They don't have any other friends to play with, basically. The West very much follows the lead of the US, and in the region, there is a lot of hostility against Iran. If they manage to normalize it a little bit with the Gulf, that was with the help of Beijing, through the Saudi Iran rapprochement and the diplomatic deal to restart their relationship. And they sort of are out of option. The conservative, sort of really ideological crowd within the Iranian decision-making elite would tell you that, for example, President Rouhani's first official trip was to Italy. It wasn't to China. We tried it. We have extended our olive branch towards the Western world, but look what Trump has done. I mean, you should take all of those narratives with a huge, handful of salt and pepper, because this duality of diplomacy versus battlefield that was conducted under President Rouhani between Mohammad Javad Zarif and Qasem Soleimani, that Zarif later really revealed that the strategy in his supposedly leaked interview tape, tells you that there was an intention. I mean, it wasn't really genuine olive branch, but at least on the surface, on the discourse, in the narrative, they have sort of sufficient evidence to convince their own constituents that we've been there, done that, we tried everything. The only people that we can trust from now on are the Chinese and the Russians. And of course, this narrative, let's not forget, has had fruit for the Iranian government. It got a seat at the Shanghai permanent position, Shanghai Cooperation, and BRICS. Yep. The League of cool kids on the street, Iran has a seat in that, and that really, in terms of the prestige, the image that I mentioned, in terms of their world vision, in terms of advancing their ideological and sort of global strategic imagination of the policymakers inside Iran, it really serves them and serves their interests. So whether it's genuine or not, whether it has ups and downs, it has led to some successful results. So I would imagine that they're pretty happy with what the narrative that they're maintaining.
Sarah, this has been really great. I would like to ask you like probably 10 or 15 more questions, but I've got my eye on the clock. My class starts in a couple of minutes and I've got to get all the way across campus. Thank you so much for doing this. This is really useful. I'm sure there's a lot in there that our audience will find really helpful. And I hope we can do it again soon.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure. Thank you. As always, wonderful talking to you.
Great talking to you. Thanks, Sarah.